Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We move to the book of war. Fighting in the way of Allah Azza wa Jal is fard kifaya. If some Muslims do it, then the others are absolved of the responsibility. This is as Allah Azza wa Jal informs us in the Quran that it is not fitting that everybody should march out, but rather there should be some people who are left behind and teach people the religion. It does, however, become fard ayn, an individual obligation, just like the salah, for example, in one of three scenarios. Scenario number one is when the two teams of soldiers meet. So at the first instance of meeting, you're not allowed to turn back. Allah Azza wa Jal says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا لقيتم فئة فاثبتوا واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون. O you who believe, when you meet the army, then be firm and remember Allah much that you may be successful. So at the instance of meeting the opponent, you're not allowed to turn back, and turning back in this case is a major sin from the kaba'ir. Scenario number two is when the enemy invades the Muslim land. So here it becomes an individual obligation. You don't need the call of the Imam. So the Imam does not need to call an army. This becomes an automatic individual obligation. Normally, to march out, you would need the Imam. You can't do it on your own. And certainly you cannot do it in sporadic groups. You would need the Imam, the Khalifa. But when it comes to fighting defensively, then this is an individual obligation and you do not need an Imam in this case. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا قاتلوا الذين يلونكم من الكفار وليجدوا فيكم غلظة واعلموا أن الله مع المتقين. O you who believe, fight those who are near you from the kuffar and let them find in you harshness, and know that Allah is with the pious ones, with the muttaqeen. So here, when the enemies invade the Muslim land, then it becomes an individual obligation whether you have an Imam or no Imam. The third scenario is when the Imam, who is the Khalifa, orders you out to march. In this case, you do not have a choice and you will have to march out in an expedition. So the important thing to note here is that marching out to fight in the way of Allah can only be done after the establishment of a khilafah. As for defensively fighting off the invader, then this is obvious and it must be done, and it is an individual obligation. In this book there are two fundamental rules, so we'll take fundamental rule number one. These are that the prisoners of war that the Muslims capture are divided into two types. The first type is the women and children, and the second type is the fighters from the enemy army, and the ruling is different for each of them. As for the first type, women and children, it is not permissible to kill women and children unless they are actively helping the enemy fighters. Rasulullah ﷺ rejected the killing of women and children. If women and children are killed as collateral damage, then there is nothing on the soldiers, as long as they did not do it intentionally. This happened one time when the army invaded the enemy soldiers and they killed their women and children, or some of them, because it was dark. They invaded by night, and the news reached Rasulullah ﷺ, and he did not condemn the soldiers for doing so, because the soldiers did not do it intentionally. It is also narrated that the Muslim soldiers invaded Banu Mustaliq, which was a tribe, and they killed the enemy combatants, and they took their women and children as slaves. So we take from this that the women and children who were not actively participating in the war are taken as slaves, and they are not to be killed as a mercy for them. As for the second type, who are the fighters from the enemies, then the Imam of the Muslims has a choice. He can do one of five. He can first of all kill them, because this was done with Bani Qurayza when Sa'd ibn Mu'adh gave the decision that their fighters are to be killed, and Rasulullah ﷺ said, "Asabta hukm Allahi fihim," that your decision coincides with the decision of Allah. The Imam can make them slaves so that they will serve the Muslim fighters, and it's only fitting because previously these people were the slaves of a shaitan, and so now you make them the slaves of the Muslims. Allah Azza wa Jal says, الذين آمنوا يقاتلون في سبيل الله والذين كفروا يقاتلون في سبيل الطاغوت فقاتلوا أولياء الشيطان إن كيد الشيطان كان ضعيفا. Those who believe fight in the cause of Allah, and those who disbelieve fight in the cause of at-taghut, which here is translated as a-shaytan. So fight against the friends or the awliya of shaitan. Ever feeble is the conspiracy of shaitan. So this ayah shows us that these enemy fighters are fighting in the way of shaitan, and hence they are his slaves. And the Muslims are fighting in the way of Allah, and hence they are the slaves of Allah. The third option is to let this prisoner free, as was done with Thumama ibn Uthal, who was the leader of Yalamlam, and the Muslim army caught him and brought him to the masjid and tied him up, and Rasulullah ﷺ asked him, "What do you expect, O Thumama?" He said, "I expect goodness from you. If you free me, you will be freeing a man who is grateful, and if you kill me, you will be killing a man of blood." So the Prophet went away. Then after a while he came back, and he asked him the same question, "O Thumama, what do you expect?" He gave the same answer, "If you free me, you will be freeing a man who is grateful, and if you kill me, you will be killing a man of blood." So the Prophet went away. Then after a while he came back, and he asked the same question, "O Thumama, what do you expect?" Thumama said, "If you free me, you will be freeing a man who is grateful, and if you kill me, you will be killing a man of blood." So upon this, the Prophet ﷺ told his companions to free him. Then Thumama went out, he took a bath, and he came back into the masjid, and he said, "Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh." And he asked the Prophet ﷺ that he wants to make Umrah, and the Prophet ﷺ allowed him to make Umrah, and his story is in the Sahih, a truly heartfelt story. The fourth option for the Imam is that he can ransom this prisoner. So in return for money, he can free the prisoner. The fifth option is that he can free the prisoner in return for a Muslim prisoner, as was done in Sahih Muslim, where the Prophet freed one prisoner from the Mushrikeen for two prisoners of the Muslimin. Fundamental rule number 2 is the war booty. The Muslims only fight to make the word of Allah superior, to make the word of Allah the highest. However, the war booty is a finger-licking side dish, so let's take a look at the rulings of the war booty. First of all, the war booty is the wealth that the enemy leaves behind after the Muslims have vanquished them. It is divided into 5 parts. 4/5 of these parts are given to the soldiers. Out of these 4 parts for the soldiers, traditionally 3 of them were given to the cavalrymen and 1 of them were given to the infantry foot soldier. The reason why 3 are given to the cavalrymen is because 2 of those 3 are for the horse and 1 for the human soldier, and as for the infantry soldier without the horse, then he has 1 share, just as all the others. So these 4 shares are for the soldiers, which leaves us with 1 share. This 1/5 is for Allah and the Messenger. But what does this mean? When we say it is for Allah, it is for the general welfare of the Muslim population. When we say it is for the Rasul, we are talking about his family, and they are Banu Hashim and Banu Abdul Muttalib, his close family, and these are the 2 families which we intend. It is also to be spent on the yatim, who is the orphan, who is the one without the father before the age of puberty, and it is spent on the Ibn Sabil, who is the wayfarer cut off from his land, and it is also spent on the Masakin, who are the poor people who don't have enough wealth to suffice them. So in summary, we have 5 categories: the Muslimin at large, the Prophet's family, who are the Banu Hashim and Banu Abdul Muttalib, the Yatim, the Ibn Sabil, and the Masakin. So these are 5 categories. So 1/5 of the war booty is spent on these 5 categories. Let us finish off this book, and indeed this whole presentation, with some review questions. So question number 1: what are the 3 scenarios in which fighting in the way of Allah becomes fard ain? Question number 2: identify the 2 categories of prisoners of war and explain how the Khalifa will deal with each one. Finally, question number 3: explain how the Khalifa would deal with the war booty and how he would distribute it.